Okay, good. Go for it.
All right, guys, welcome Richard Bennett to the summit, the Climate Change Social Action Summit. Richard brings with him a great wealth of experience, both from his background as a rugby player, but mainly how he used that to generate conversations about education in Africa. And if you want to know how that happened, well, luckily he's here to tell us the story. Hey, Richard.
Hi, Cameron. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. I'm just lucky to get to meet you guys because I didn't know you existed before this. So that's a treat.
Yeah, no, it's nice. It's nice to be online with you and everyone today.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually the most social interaction I've had in quite a while. So that's quite nice too. And how are you getting on?
Yeah, all good. It's sort of interesting how my perception to this whole weird and extraordinary situation has changed in recent weeks. We had quite an action-packed 2020 paved out for us. As an organisation, we brought on board a CEO in January, having worked with this particular individual, Gareth Noakes, who's now with us as of January for quite some time before, kind of, I guess, 14 months prior. And he'd been a huge help to me and to the organisation as we started to kind of visualize a new strategy coming into 2020 in line with his appointment. So quite a lot of work had been done in preparation for that. We are, as I'll go into more detail shortly, one of our biggest and most exciting projects that we've been working on, which is certainly a kind of leading light for the sort of work that we want to do in all African countries that we work in, all 8 African countries that we work in. We've been constructing a sports and education community centre in rural Lilongwe in Malawi. Gareth has had quite a lot to do with that. So I guess when you want me to give you a little bit more sort of context on the organisation, I'll do so. But
and also, who are you? Like, for anyone who doesn't know who we are, I mean, I'm just a traveler who ended up being a tree planter and got involved with this. And yeah, I actually don't know you. So how did you come, let's say, to speak about education? Did you ever expect to find yourself here?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting. I don't. I didn't expect to be honest, to kind of, I guess, sort of be given opportunities to sort of speak on topics of education or sport for development. It's been a really interesting 10-year journey. And I got to know Namisha through my fiance, and she kindly invited me on. I think something that I'm kind of starting to become more comfortable with is this idea that people are quite interested in a story, you know, something that, you know, perhaps can maybe inspire others. And if you've been on a journey yourself, as I'm sure you have, Cameron, and be good to know more about you and your story, I think people are inspired by that. So I think, yeah, I was interested in what Namisha does. She was interested in what I do, and I guess that was the kind of link. But yeah, I guess just, you know, referencing back to this year, you know, my personal take is, it was like we were all just kind of bombarded by this completely crazy situation, and no one really knew how to respond to it. We had a number of volunteers out on the ground in Tanzania, volunteers and a team. Gareth was in Malawi at the time working on our build project, and we had to sort of initiate this unforeseen repatriation of volunteers back to their homes, something we'd never had to do before, and kind of abandon at the time a sort of whole set of plans for this year. And during that process where you're sort of having to work out what you do next, it sort of feels like, you know, you're kind of staring into the abyss a little bit, not quite sure, knowing what to do really. But like I say, as time has gone on, I've been able to reflect on this. We've been able to sort of take stock of this period, look at our strategy, work on things in the background, and actually, you know, for the organization, and I wouldn't have said this 6 weeks ago, it's been really helpful. I know that there's a lot of pain and suffering that's going on, but for us and me on a personal level, who's been on As an Omission knows, you know, a bit of a challenging personal and professional journey over the last 10 years, it is quite good to take stock of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been dying to be incarcerated or something, you know, just to stop me for a bit, to give me a chance to, you know, reflect and not just keep chasing. No matter how noble the chase is, you know, sometimes it can become a bit of a habit, you know, to just, and for the whole world to stop along with me was quite convenient. So just a little bit from my background, because maybe you'll be able to relate. I was a filmmaker, or I guess I still am, but I wanted to use that passion to travel and to tell stories, as you're describing, and see if basically I can make a life out of what I love without any compromise, you know, and see how I can connect with people through that. And I actually paired up with a cook who wanted to do the same thing. So we ended up trading food for stories for about 2 years, crossing, well, the Northeast Hemisphere, going from Italy to Singapore and back, generally without flying, and meeting many people, collecting the ingredients for a cookbook, and yeah, using our passions to connect us with people. And it's taught us a lot, for sure. And maybe we even helped some people along the way. But I'm wondering, yeah, what was your initial passion in your life before embarking on your project?
So I grew up in South Africa in the 1980s and 1990s before emigrating to the UK. And I come from quite a privileged background. I went to some good schools, and then the same is to be said of when we moved over to the UK. But I sort of felt, and we moved at a time as a family where I felt I was leaving something behind. I mean, have you been to Africa?
Not real Africa, no, just Egypt.
Okay. You got to extend your travels down to sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, you something that captures all your senses, and you just whether you grew up there or whether you visit at any time in your life, people always say that they want to go back, and for me, Africa was calling. So when I finished university. No, when I finished school, initially I went back to South Africa because I was young when I left. I was only 14. So I just wanted to kind of go and visit what we as a family left behind. And that kind of reignited that spark for me. And then obviously through my 20s, I had to go back, and I traveled quite a lot in East and Southern Africa. And yeah, that process of learning about cultures and visiting different communities, it kind of stays with you. I like to get under the skin of countries and communities. And after finishing my undergraduate degree, I got into teaching, and through that process, I developed a real interest for working with kids, both in the classroom and then on the sports field, tennis, coaching rugby. And I guess the combination of teaching and having that real interest, that interest in teaching and learning, both sides of it, and then this consistent calling for Africa, it was just like this beautiful coming together, that at one point I just felt. And I'd kind of had this idea to drive through the continent of Africa, which ultimately I did do in 2012, which I prepared a lot for. But I'd seen a lot, various forums, other people had done it, and I didn't see it as an insurmountable task. It was something that, I'm quite an adventurous person, so I just thought the right planning, you'd be able to do it. But I wanted to combine my interests for teaching and learning, and particularly sport, and see whether we could use sport as a tool for social development and community upliftment, perhaps. And that, in the early stages, we were looking at ways of seeing how we could use the sessions where we were coaching groups, hundreds of kids, boys and girls, and engaging local teachers and coaching staff in our sessions, seeing how we could maybe incorporate life skills delivery into those sessions, educational, supplementary education. But it was quite difficult in the early stages. But anyway, long story short, we've been able to sort of build on all that work over the years, where we've developed these deep-rooted, amazing relationships with communities in 8 countries. And we're now on this amazing path. And yeah, this year it's really does feel like we're embarking on a new journey, where we continue to use rugby, introduce netball. And what's important for us, and that, I guess, coming back to your question about spark, is I could see that even when I was the coach for the under 15B team, with lads that would sort of come out of the class, this is in the UK, on those really wet and muddy days, and sort of forget to put their contact lenses on because rugby really isn't their thing, and they've still got their glasses on as they come out to play a contact sport. But you think when you get them involved in playing sport, it creates this sense of togetherness, unity, all the values that we talk about, that young people get this chance just to sort of chuck a ball around and be with their mates and learn social skills that maybe they don't get from certain teachers in the classroom or whatever. So I guess that was a spark. The spark of sort of initiating that first expedition, as we call it, taking a group of volunteers through Africa and leading these rugby coaching sessions in all these different communities. There was a series of sparks, and many, many, many challenges, which I have this sort of bizarre aversion to letting challenges get in my way. And we've actually turned it into a bit of a mantra at the Basic Pride Foundation, which is, I'm sure people in your forum will understand this, but turning a challenge into an opportunity. We always find that that's something that people really enjoy adopting. But yeah.
Boom. So someone's hammering something relentlessly outside my window. So I'm going to close it, and I'm going to let Nimisha reconnect with you for a minute.
Sure. So, Rich, I think a lot of people who are listening, right, they're all here because for whatever reason, these sustainable development goals speak to them and they feel like they want to do something. And everyone is passionate about a different point of view. Those who are watching this will be specifically passionate about education and it getting to all of the corners of the world. In your work, or the work that you have done, have you found a correlation between introducing sport and then seeing more kids join schools, or basically something related to retaining kids in schools because they've got a wider curriculum of things to do?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a couple of examples. In Tanzania, what we found, certainly from our experiences in different government schools that we've been working in, physical education isn't typically something which is embedded within the national curriculum, which is strange because, for people like you and me, or anybody who appreciates the value of sport within an educational setup, it gives young people the chance to, well, as I said earlier, learn other things, or perhaps to consolidate the learnings that they might have had in the classroom. But that just doesn't feature in a lot of schools in Africa. We're in 8 countries. I mentioned Tanzania. You go into Malawi, where we're doing a lot of great work in rural Lilongwe, and you have kids under the age of 12, 13 in primary school settings, in classrooms where a lot of the time, certainly for the younger ones, there's no desks, they're all sitting on the floor. You walk into a classroom, you see this sort of room full of heads, with a teacher at the front of the class doing his or her best to impart some form of valuable knowledge to these young people, but it just seems like an unenviable task, certainly for me as a teacher or a coach. But when our volunteers arrive in our sort of brightly coloured minibus, and we obviously in collaboration with local stakeholders, we've got a development officer that we employ in Lilongwe, we're able to get kids out playing sport, obviously when they are permitted to do so as part of a timetable program. It's like you transform their lives. And remember, primary education in places like rural Lilongwe, in rural areas in Malawi, in a lot of parts of countries like Malawi in Africa, is very, very limited. And the quality of education is extremely poor, and that's not taking anything away from the passionate teachers that we work with. But when you have a classroom that doesn't have a roof on it, when you have lessons that are having to take place under a tree outside, when kids or teachers don't have access to basic educational resources, whether it's books or a chalkboard, or stationery, or obviously, as we consider more technological advances with things like interactive whiteboards or things like that, it's very, very difficult to elicit the sort of educational outcomes that you'd want from both teachers and children. But what we found is that when we get young people involved in sport, and certainly we've seen this because some of the things that my colleague Rory, our operations director, has implemented, are certain incentivized approaches to if there are young children that are performing well in the class, they're allowed to take part in sporting activities. And there are very few kids that don't want to take part in sporting activities, especially when they're able to, at the end of a particular program, take part in a tournament day with maybe 10 teams, 100 kids involved, boys, girls, coaches and referees blowing whistles, music on, maybe a local journalist from Lilongwe there that's reporting on the day's activities. There's this like amazing sort of knock-on effect that happens where children and teachers alike are just completely motivated, taken to a new level where they just think, by being offered this opportunity, something that normally doesn't happen, it just creates this real sense of appreciation, well-being, and wanting to well, I guess knowing that there is more beyond the life that they are so familiar with,
Yeah, I think the most important one, I think sometimes when we grow up here or in the West, so to speak, we forget that because we've had this really varied and rich kind of childhood and experience, we've been exposed to so many opportunities for the fortune of the education systems we have here. It's not really the same there. And I think sometimes people don't appreciate that in those schools as well, there is no other like socializing kind of activity. It's just come to school, do the work, go home, and there's no like social element apart from when they're outside school and they're kind of just doing it themselves. So one of the things I did want to ask you was, can you give examples of how you've seen kids flourish, like, from where they've been to getting involved in these sports, and then how has that impacted how they perform at school as well?
Yeah, I think my colleague Rory would be able to give better case study responses to that question, because he works a lot more closely with the communities. But one thing I will say, just to give you some anecdotal examples, on one of my last visits to Malawi, so July, November last year, there were two occasions that just completely warmed my heart. And bear in mind that I've invested my life in this for the last 10 years, and sometimes it can feel, I suppose that my biggest sort of challenge and desire combined as we sort of look to the future is making sure that we as an organization can do more, very much in a collaborative sense, and as we've been sort of putting everything into this, what I want to see is change and people's lives being impacted. And Rory, my colleague, works very closely with our development officer, Wordsworth Rashid, on the ground. And when I went out on one of my last visits in July, Rory we went along to a tournament day where there was about, 150 children involved, all these different teams. And that was the first time for me where I was able to see, because normally it's our overseas volunteers that facilitate these sorts of events. But this was a wholly managed, facilitated tournament day off the back of a series of programs that have been slowly developing over the sort of preceding 18 months. And this was the type of event now that was happening regularly. And I just had to stand on the side of the pitch and just admire Wordsworth, our development officer, and about 10 or 15 local coaches and teachers who, through Rory and Wordsworth's organization, had come on, various the transportation to get to this central location. Obviously transported the kids there. We've got food and refreshments, obviously something that you need. All the basic things that we might sort of think are the obvious things that we'd have as part of a program like this, but trying to organize it in Malawi, and it's a completely different animal. But it was just happening. And I had to just go and, stand next to Rory and just say, Rory, this is really happening. This is amazing. You and Wordsworth should take a lot of credit. And obviously I know that because I'm very much aware of our charity operations. This is what we do. But to actually be there and kind of witness it firsthand, and to know that, our local stakeholders on the ground are making immense progress, it warms my heart. And then I guess another example is we do a lot of coach education. So we work with local coaches on the ground, and I'm referencing Malawi a lot because it is a real strategic focus for us. We're building a community centre in rural Lilongwe, so lots happening. We've got this group of about 45 local coaches aged between what I thought were around 18 to, I guess, early mid 30s, men, women, and who have all developed a real interest in rugby. And we are in the process of introducing netball, by the way, who only through BPF have learned how to coach rugby. And obviously learn the game, basic touch rugby, tag rugby. We're not sort of going down to the sort of the intricacies of 15-a-side rugby, but fun rugby for boys and girls, touch rugby, tag rugby, that type of thing. And long term, we'll want it to develop into sevens. There are now, again, when I've been to some of these sessions, young girls aged around 16 who, and Rory mentions it because obviously he works so closely with Wordsworth, he'll just point out a certain coach. And I remember seeing this young girl, I can't remember her name, 16 years old, obviously one of the children that have come through our programs in the schools that we work in. We're in 6 primary schools and 3 secondary schools in this rural area of Lilongwe, and she's coaching rugby. And I'm like, that just shouldn't be happening. Like, we're like in this rural area of Malawi, like, teaching the sport, which, for so many people is seen as this, colonial, predominantly white male sport. And here's communities in Malawi just turning all of those preconceptions on its head. And you've got young Malawians coaching other kids how to play a sport and imparting our own pride values, things like professionalism, respect, integrity, discipline, enjoyment, things that we embody and promote as an organization, and interpreting it in their own ways, knowing that, that you don't just get points for scoring a try or a goal. You get points for demonstrating those values through the behavior that you present on the pitch or with your peers off it. So, I mean, there's so many things that I've seen over the years, but certainly the last couple of years, and as we look ahead to the future, what we're starting to see now is the fruits of our labor, and just this amazing reception from communities that you just wouldn't expect to be able to adopt a sport like this, or to welcome people from outside, and to know that there are opportunities well beyond the perceived opportunities that are presented to them in their quite small communities. So it's quite humbling.
Absolutely. And I think I love that story. It's like you're kind of tackling all these perceived inequalities as well through, creating these opportunities where you're also seeing women come through and work. I think that's really promising. And
creating
also,
context as well.
Yeah, go on, Cameron. Yeah.
I was just creating a new context in a way that I think sport can offer in a way that we need. As people, I think we've always done something that's like as a tribe, as a physical kind of exercise, and nowadays that's less and less, and it's been kind of relegated to sport. Maybe not. Maybe there's actually more now than ever because of sport. But it's something in our blood, and it's a problem-solving exercise, and it's a community-building exercise, and it creates a new context as well. So you can. Someone who otherwise would maybe think that, okay, maybe my role in life is to be like middle management in a company, when in fact I'm a leader on the field, or I'm happy to be part of a smaller team, and just one of many people, and it just recontextualizes their position and who they can be in relation to that team. So I'm just damn grateful that you're doing this, and I just would love some advice, I guess, or just like some of the challenges you faced along the way, and give a sense of what it takes to pass this on to people, and what you might expect to face if you try to establish a program like this.
Honestly, Cameron, there's so many different ways I could answer that question. I want to make it fun for your listeners. A few years ago, we started out on the process of procuring some land in Lilongwe in Malawi, on which our plan was to build this community center, and I had to go through this really so many hoops. I had to jump through various government departments to go and visit, and then even though I'd been told to visit that particular government department, it was the wrong one. I had to go and see another one. So I'm being passed from pillar to post to go through the process of legally acquiring this land, having established an NGO in Malawi. That in itself was another process altogether. But what was interesting was that we had to agree the sale or purchase of the land, which, to give assurance to everybody listening, was done in the most respectful way possible to ensure that the village landowners were remunerated very, very fairly for the land that we bought. It must be said that had their land been bought by other Malawians, it would have been done so at a much lower prices. But we purchased this 7-acre plot from 6 different families, and having paid the first deposit in about, I think it was January 2018, when I had to make the final payment to each of the families, it was quite a sobering experience to know that, and you know, this shouldn't have come as a surprise to me, and it did, but it shouldn't have done. None of these families have bank accounts. So I had to I had to go through the process of going to a bank and withdrawing a huge amount of cash to actually put it in my my rucksack. And I was riding a motorbike at the time to take it out to these families, and you know, 1,000 kwacha in Malawi will get you a coffee, and that's the biggest notes, the biggest denomination. So you can imagine I had a rucksack full of notes, yeah, had to take that out to pay these families, but did so in a local bank in the hope that they opened a bank account. But it's times like that where you think, you know, I hope that what we're doing is going to benefit these families, because obviously they will use that money to go and buy a plot of land. As you know, in these towns in Africa, there's a lot of urbanization, so you know, residential and commercial properties being established on land such as the plot that we bought. So they'll just buy a few kilometers out of town, and you hope that that process, obviously, you know, in liaising with that particular family, helps them. And in doing a transaction like that, you just hope that, you know, the long-term gains of what you're trying to do by ultimately being able to have a center which is going to interact with hundreds of children and local community leaders, helping them in, you know, to have access to sport. And on the site, we're going to have learning spaces, classrooms where we facilitate supplementary educational workshops and activities. Yeah, it was just one of those moments where you kind of had to check yourself and make sure that what you're doing, and as I say, everything we do is hand in hand with the community. We have this amazing reception every time we're in these communities, but that we're doing what we're doing is of long-term value. You know, you have to constantly kind of go through that process and make sure that what you're doing is right. I think it is. But yeah, you're faced with challenges all the time, whether they're practical challenges, logistical challenges, ethical challenges, and you have to face up to them. You have to think, is this right? Am I happy with? Am I content with the decision that I'm making on behalf of other people? Are other people happy with what I and the organization I represent is doing? Are we happy with the long-term impact that we're going to make? And if you can answer yes to that, and you feel, yeah, you feel happy with the decisions that you're making and taking, then you've got to back yourself. And I think that's one of the toughest things for all of us is, you know, you will have your naysayers and your critics out there, but if you want to achieve good things in this life, whether it's for yourself or for others, you've got to back yourself and take those risks and make it happen.
It's a good lesson. Good lesson right there.
I couldn't agree more. Especially when we're on the wider level discussing, you know, sustainable development. I mean, you know, your story, or if we look at, you know, other entrepreneurs or change makers, it's funny the things that you all collectively, or we all collectively talk about, our challenges are very much the same. You know, it's that we really want people around us who are supporting us in our mission. We need that at the very beginning. We need to believe that we are truly doing something of purpose, and when we're doing that, we, like you said, really have to back ourselves, because you're so right. There's so many times where people have looked at me and gone, "You want to plant 1 billion trees? What's wrong with you? Like, have you lost your mind?" So there is that aspect of it. And I like that you referenced that, back yourself. I think that it is really important, and is sometimes very easily forgotten, because there's no better supporter to you than yourself, really. So yeah.
Yeah. No, there's many times along this journey where I could have just walked away, but yeah, whether it's an email that I send or receive to someone who's closely connected to the work that we do, whether it's a trip out to Malawi that is engaging in certain activities which is furthering the goals of the charity, whether it's inspiring a new partner, or seeing some of the activities that I mentioned earlier happening in front of you. There's just no way that you can just not do what you do. You can diversify what you do, but I'm just really proud of the teams of volunteers and people and local coaches and various organizations that have been with us along the way, that just embrace me and us and everyone connected to this journey in such a way that it's sort of it perpetuates. Something good happens, you're able to do something else good, like it, and it's just a really positive, but it's just you build up that positive momentum. Towards the end of February this year, I was questioning where things might be going, but a few months down the line, we've managed to sort of ride it out a little bit, as I'm sure you have and others have, and hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel for all of us.
And I think even these sorts of, we rarely have situations on a global level like this, but it does remind us as well how important the work all of us do is as well. Like, I just think listening to so many of the speakers today and even listening to you, I just think, gosh, how many skills have all of these communities gained because, people like you or people like Few or Joanna have been out in these communities creating these infrastructures, opportunities, situations. And it's those things that I personally believe are how they are, surviving or thriving through this whole situation, because I think we sometimes underestimate even our ability to just transfer skills to each other, and that by giving someone one thing, it's actually giving them so many things, but we just don't ever think about that.
Yeah, 100%. And just you referenced something which makes me think about again another of our another ethos of Blue Basic Pride Foundation, which is this idea of sharing and learning. So we have quite an established volunteer program where we have about 40 volunteers from all over the world that go out and volunteer in our programs every year. That they take part in our expedition, which takes them through 8 countries, and people join for 3 or 4 weeks or several months, coaching with us in these different communities. It's an amazing experience for everyone involved, but invariably the volunteers learn as much, if not more, from their experiences than obviously the imparting of some skills in rugby or how to be a better coach to local coaches. There's so much reciprocal learning that happens. And we are always reminding our volunteers, and something that I experience on a firsthand is that we're all learning, and if you don't, if you think you're going to stop learning, then you really ought to think again. But for us, it's a constant process, and I think in that way that if you have that mindset where I'm going to learn as much from these experiences or from the other people that I'm working with, even though one of my own goals is to share some skills that I have, which is an altruistic act in itself. But if your mindset is I want to learn as much, not in a taking sort of way, but in a way that you feel there's by taking part in this activity, we're all sharing and learning at the same time.
Yeah, it's symbiotic in this sense.
Yeah,
you know, like,
Yeah.
and
And
you're not
it,
going to be a good teacher if you're not willing to adapt and learn and
yeah.
take on.
And there's a level of responsibility there as well, for all of us. That is, we have to be sensitive to the needs of any of the communities that we work with, or anywhere we visit in the world. We have to really understand the people that we're working with. Like, you know, I guess, Namisha, for you, you work with all sorts of clients. If you rocked up in some commercial organization and just said, this is what we're going to do, and you don't, you know,
Get kicked
listen
out.
to their needs, like, it's the same thing. We all have to work together. And I think, you know, you see so much stuff that's happening in the world at the moment, and yeah, at the heart of so much of it, it's because people aren't collaborating in an effective
Yeah,
enough way. And, you know, so.
I agree. I mean, I think it's one of my personal missions through all of the work I do to create all sorts of opportunities for people to collaborate, because I really, really believe, you know, if we're going to turn the tide, turn our little blue dot or arc or whatever you want to call it, we're not going to do it by trying to solve all these problems individually. We all have to work collectively. And I think, you know, being a consultant, when you're kind of trained to look at problems from a very holistic perspective, you realize that the biggest issue we have in this world is just even distribution of resources. That is, simply put, the toughest challenge we have, right? So a really simple way is exactly how you put it: collaborate more. You know, you've, like, for example, you guys have a really good network within, you know, Africa when it comes to schools and, you know, volunteers. There's many ways that people can then come and partner with you guys and, you know, double or triple that impact through some of the work they do. So I mean, that's just an example, but yeah, I think for me, even the summit is just an, you know, is a way to demonstrate that when all of you come and share each of your individual missions and how it comes together collectively to form this bigger puzzle. I have no doubt that it's going to form collaborations. It's going to get people kind of looking at each other going, hey, I could do this with you and we could do this. I mean, our whole campaign that this summit supports came from just doing exactly that, coming together and saying, okay, how can we rescue these trees and how can we support young people in UK during COVID using these trees? So, and you know what? I think there's also a cultural norm that we as change makers, as social entrepreneurs, all of us have to get over, which I think is not very normal in the kind of charitable sector, because you got, you know, in that segment of the market, they rely on kind of support from each other to grow. But I think as entrepreneurs, we're sometimes programmed to just think competitively. So we never think, well, okay, actually it would be great to work with this person and that person because we're going to amplify our impact. So that's something that definitely also has to change. And yeah, for me, that's why it's a personal mission. Like, let's get more people working together, because you're
Yeah,
just gonna get to places quicker.
for sure. If you want to plant some trees, Namisha, you don't need to look much further than Malawi. There's a huge deforestation problem there.
I know.
But yeah, I mean, you know, we come home, we switch our electric or gas ovens on. We don't think about where we get our sources of heat from. But if you go into these rural African areas, you know, people have to burn wood for cooking and heating, and so
And I think you raised such
can't
an
blame people.
point. Exactly, because I think, you know, sometimes we also tend to look at these problems in isolation, right? Like, if we supported good quality education and outreach to younger kids in schools, we would be able to use those avenues to educate them about all these other things that are not necessarily good for them, right? It's like, we had a speaker earlier today, and I'm sure it's kind of to your story you also shared earlier, where she was talking about how, because she'd hired so many staff in Kenya to kind of set up her production unit, she also realized that in order to give them decent work, she would have to, you know, get them to get bank accounts so she can pay them a salary, and that's all.
Yeah, exactly.
But what she found was that when she helped her community do that, a lot of these banks would just turn around and then offer loans to these people because now they have a bank account. So, you know, that, in hearing that from her, also was like a trigger moment for me, where I was like, you know, education is also, just across the board, it doesn't matter what age you are, about just basic survival and necessity, which we
Yeah,
take
exactly.
for granted. We
Yeah.
don't realize that sometimes they just don't even, maybe they have a bank account, but that doesn't mean they need a loan. It's more about financial planning and how to.
100%. And the thing is, we don't have to. When you look at these huge NGOs that and the UN, who obviously have these grand plans for primary education in the developing world, we don't have to follow the same agenda as countries in the developed world. I mean, I think so much of our education in the UK, I can't really talk for other developed countries, but I think there's so many flaws. There are things in my education that I would have loved to have learned. Over the last 10 years, having invested so much of my own money and time into the Basic Pride Foundation, I've overlooked my own financial management side of things, and I'm having to go through a process of upskilling myself through that on a personal level.
Yeah.
And I think, well, why wasn't I taught about these basic things in school? We don't have to think, okay, well, just because the UK has a certain curriculum about how it teaches its young people certain topics or subjects in school, we don't have to create the same system in other parts of the world. We don't have to do that. We should be very carefully working with government officials and local organizations in different countries to understand what really matters for young people in Malawi or Tanzania or Zambia or Botswana as they move into teenagehood. What are the real challenges that they're facing, and then as they reach adulthood? I've just been working on a module for an e-learning course that we're developing to help communities that we're working with, and it's a number of different courses that we're doing. But I've recently been working on a malaria e-learning course, and I've learned a lot through that particular process as well. And some of the statistics are really horrifying.
Yeah.
But before we start thinking about the sorts of basic education that young people in Malawi need, we want to make sure that young people make it past the age of 5.
Exactly.
They're not affected by things like malaria, which almost 2/3 of children under the age of 5 in sub-Saharan Africa die of malaria, or of the deaths caused by malaria. That is. And so, if you're educating people on certain aspects that affect their lives, you need to be able to provide them with not just the knowledge, but the resources to be able to upskill themselves and resource themselves and their families and their communities effectively. So yeah, we're going through that process of seeing how we can kind of move from sport in the community and sport for development, and seeing how we can incorporate supplementary education, but not in a way that limits people. That's important.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's like you said, it's very easy to get sucked into a framework because it worked in one place. That doesn't necessarily mean it works anywhere else. And you're absolutely right. I mean, one of my own personal stories I remember was kind of visiting Kenya a few years ago. This is like 4 or 5 years ago. And speaking to some young kids there. And I think that's also something we don't realize. Like, if you want to understand what young people need, talk to them. Like, go talk to them, because they'll tell you what they want. And it's interesting, this generation, they're, especially in Africa, their primary concern is very much what you said. Am I going to survive? Like, am I going to make it past a certain age? It's not about like, am I going to get the car, or I want to buy the mobile phone? It's none of those things. And I think there's such a disconnectedness in that space between young people in one part of the world and in another. And I think that bridging of gaps also needs to happen, because I think if young people over here really understood the complexities that their peers were facing in other parts of the world, they would advocate for them, they would become allies, they would support them. So yeah, I think, there is such a big disparity on how we view education, and then we look contextually at where are we implementing it and does it really work.
Yeah, yeah, holistic education such that it is being effective for young people and their carers or guardians or parents or elders, community leaders. It needs to all work in harmony within a particular community, and that it's relevant to that area. That's what's really important. It can't be disjointed, as you say, disconnected. It can't. It has to all work in harmony.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and as you've pointed out, you learn as much from doing these projects as you give, if not more. So I can imagine, like, the developed world seems to have a lot of, but is unsatisfied with it almost always. And when I've spent time in developing countries, people are far more, tuned in and grateful for what they have in many places, in India or in Cambodia, or even in like certain neighborhoods of Philadelphia. There's a certain gratitude that we're missing, I think, from the developed world. And I can imagine that you've come across a lot of sort of perspective shifting places and people on your travels, that have kind of recontextualized your life and your problems. And that's what you get back, I guess, from doing programs like this. And I'm wondering what maybe some of these lessons were for you personally.
Yeah, I mean, we so one of the things that we do, we run this expedition through Africa, 8 countries. It's a huge operation, where we have volunteers that are from all parts of the world that are coming in at different points, whether it's Nairobi or Kampala or Dar es Salaam, Lilongwe, Gaborone, wherever along our route, people coming and going. And then we have a group of volunteers at any one point that will be running a 2-3 week outreach community coaching program with local communities. And sometimes what we do, we have some funding from a Scottish organisation, the Bill McLaren Foundation, who provide us some funds to enable opportunities for African coaches that we work with to take part in that expedition, which means that they can, for very often, more often than not, leave their country where they're a resident of. Obviously, they've never left their country before, as I say, in most instances, and they get the chance to travel to a neighbouring country with, obviously, in the very safe setup that we have, with a group of volunteers and our staff, giving them a chance to travel, see other parts of Africa, go to other communities, learn from those communities, and vice versa. But there's been situations where, obviously, you've got some volunteers of varying ages, as I say, from different walks of life, and they might want to go whitewater rafting in Ginger in Uganda, or maybe do a bungee jump in Zambia, for instance, over in Victoria Falls or South Africa, or whatever. And maybe at the end of a tournament day where you've maybe facilitated alongside other local teachers and coaches a festival of rugby with sort of 300 or 400 kids, and maybe at the end of the day you want to have a beer. But perhaps you've got a male or female coach African coach that's with you in that group. Maybe they don't drink. And obviously there's other volunteers who won't drink either, but you're sort of, before you have to realize quite quickly that's a cultural issue, and obviously if you don't want to find yourself in a situation where people maybe feel that they need to kind of follow the crowd in any way. So we're very, very respectful and sensitive to those sorts of issues. And in the same way, if our group are spending quite a lot of money on certain activities, tourist-related activities, we have to make sure that we've provided a small budget for that African coach that's on that part of the journey to take part in those activities as well, so that they don't feel left out. Again, it's another cultural situation that we've had to become quite sensitive to. And I remember one occasion where a young Malawian chap that was with us worked out that a particular activity would mean that if he didn't do it, he could buy himself a pair of shoes, new shoes. And so you sort of think, oh, yeah, you've got to be wise to that sort of thing, and think, how do you manage a certain situation like that? Do you encourage someone to take part in an activity that maybe is a once in a lifetime experience, or do you think, oh, actually, that money could be used a lot more effectively to enhance their own life? In the same way, when you go to, there's many times when you go for a restaurant meal with friends, and you invite for instance, a local Malawian, and obviously the cost of living is so different. A Malawian can have a meal for less than £1 in their own community, but you've got individuals who are picking up a bill for food and drink worth £15-20, and it's sort of situations like that. You have to be very sensitive to sort of understand what's going on and make sure that you don't, I guess, insult anybody or offend. But I guess all the time we're always considering the bigger picture, and if we're affording a young person the opportunity to travel to another part of Africa, we see that as a huge opportunity for them, a learning experience, educational experience, which we know is of huge value. And long term, what we really hope is that the same individuals and others will get the chance to have paid roles with Bubesi Pride Foundation in their own communities, either as a development officer, education officer, or a coach or a support staff. That for us is the long-term goal, such that we have self-sustaining, locally delivered programs that combine sports and education, and you have the right people in post, and that's what we're working towards. But along the way, you always have to look out for these sort of nuanced situations that you have to be quite careful about how you manage them.
Yeah, I'm so happy that you brought travel into the mix too, and I mean, that's been my greatest teacher, hands down, much better than school. And yeah, is travel, just for my own curiosity, is travel among, let's say, young people a common thing in sub-Saharan Africa? Like, do people just travel as like maybe, like young, potentially not necessarily privileged, but like people who have some spare time in Europe will just go hitchhike, around and live on the streets, or live in a tent or something. And they'll do that for the experience. Does this happen at all in Africa?
Well, firstly, like you, I see the value of travel. I think it is an incredible way, if you have the means, to learn more about yourself and other people that you meet on that journey, wherever you go, and other cultures and countries and communities, and wherever you go, you're able to learn. And I echo your comments on that. In Africa, the sorts of individuals that we work with, and I'm talking about young people and teachers and coaches from. We interact with a lot of government schools, and we're in communities in fairly impoverished areas. They are more concerned about where their next meal comes from, and having the means to be able to pay for that meal. So we've got about 45 local coaches that work with us in a community sports outreach program in rural Lilongwe. Anytime we're asking them to travel anywhere beyond their community, we have to make sure that we cover their travel costs, which could be on the back of a bicycle taxi, back of a motorbike taxi, or in a minibus taxi. And for you and me, those costs are nominal. But for a local Malawian or an African, and whichever area they live in, that's a lot to them. So we have to make sure we cover those sorts of costs and provide them with refreshments as well, because they're taking part in an activity on top of any wage that we might be giving them as well. But in terms of them traveling anywhere beyond that, it would be to visit family. So sometimes you'll come across community members who maybe grew up in Blantyre in the south of Malawi, and maybe they've moved to Lilongwe and they've got a job as a teacher. Sometimes they'll go back to Blantyre to see family, or Salima, or different parts of Lake Malawi, for instance. They've got family members there. Or perhaps there are different family members that live together, and sometimes they'll go and see other members of their extended family in different parts of the country. That would be the main reason why people travel, if they can get the money together to do so. But yeah, the idea of kind of hitchhiking for sort of personal reward, or maybe trying to get across to another country, when you consider that having an ID card or a passport is something that you obviously need to pay for, and that's something a lot of African citizens won't have. That's a whole new concept that people just they're not there yet. There are other more important things that people will prioritize. But I must say, and I come back to the stories I was sharing earlier of some of the African coaches that have been able to take part in our expedition. That has been a vehicle, literally, for them to expand their own horizons and travel to other communities, other countries in Africa, to have the types of experiences that you and I are familiar with, and we see, definitely see travel as an experiential learning activity. And for us to be able to facilitate that, I'm really, really happy that we can.
And a professional one too. Like, I definitely wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for traveling for a living, in a way, and making connections in this sense. And I actually overlooked something, and I asked you that question. Of course, young men from Africa travel. I lived in Berlin the last 2 years, and they're my neighbors. They come to Europe for opportunity. And I was just wondering if that happened within Africa as well, if people were trying to travel to, Nairobi or Lagos or something, to create this collaboration as well in Africa, or if this was something that was just seen as like a luxury or too far out of reach, to travel for opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think it just depends on your socioeconomic background, your circumstances, maybe what your parents do for a living, what school you went to.
Went to school, yeah.
Yeah, I know Nairobi reasonably well, and it's known to have a lot of very, 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 very good schools. I would have been very happy to have gone to a number of schools in Nairobi and other parts of Kenya. An amazing schooling experience. But of course, to do that as a young person, you need to have the means. But I think when if you're a Kenyan or a Tanzanian or Malawian or Zambian, and it's able to go to a good school and interact with other people and other networks, which maybe mean that you're able to be presented with opportunities for overseas travel, or perhaps receive some sort of bursary or scholarship to go to the UK or the US. I have friends that have had that sort of opportunity, whether they're from Kenya or Botswana, but they come from very, very different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the community members or the stakeholders that we work with as an organization, without that connection to BPF, wouldn't typically have that sort of opportunity. Talking about it with you now, Wordsworth, our development officer in Malawi, if it wasn't for coronavirus, would have actually been in the UK a couple of months ago in May for a leadership conference, linking up with a London-based Premiership rugby club, and would have had the opportunity to link up with another of our development officer that we work with in Tanzania. We were arranging for him to come over as well, and these guys would have been able to meet people from all over the world that this particular club, this institution, was facilitating this leadership conference. And that would have been the first time, just talking about Wordsworth, for him to have left Malawi or to come to the UK. First time he would have gone on a plane. Awesome. Before that, the first time he had for international travel was to go to Zambia and Botswana, and that was with us as well. So it would have been amazing for him to come to the UK, and he will get that opportunity again. But yes, if it wasn't if he wasn't to have access to those sorts of opportunities, or I guess for others who've maybe had a different upbringing, the sorts of people we work with wouldn't ordinarily have those sorts of opportunities. Maybe that's a chance for you to come in, given your background on things.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough perspective to give, because I do agree with you. In Nairobi, we had fantastic schools. I cannot fault for a second my growing up there. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like, it was one of, the best experiences. Do I think that did extend to a vast majority of kids in schools at that time? Probably not. Because again, it's like you said, right? It depends from what social economic background they come, and whether they even, like you said, is it even something that is in their sphere of influence? Because most of the time, for most people, getting a good education out in Africa it means opportunity, Slightly tangent off, but it does align with what you're asking. My dad, a lot of his staff, he knew could not afford to send their kids to good schools in Kenya, like you described. So he would pay for it, because he recognized that, these kids will then lift these parents out of this cycle. So you definitely saw pockets of that kind of, social support that employers would give to their staff. But these are all based on relationships. These are not like, NGOs going out and rolling these programs. But for the vast majority of those kids who did have access to that, there is a lot of, to your point, Cameron, they have mobility now. They have been able to get jobs in a very burgeoning market in Kenya, which is around tech. So they now work in that tech industry. And actually, I remember one of my dad's previous assistants sending me a picture, because her son was going on his first business trip to Mombasa on the train. And it was such an exciting thing for him and her, because he was like, oh, I'm going for work, but then I'm going to be staying at a hotel. And so it's it's happening, but all of those things are happening because the infrastructure is growing, the middle class is growing, opportunities are more. That doesn't mean they're equally distributed, but there are more of them.
Yeah. And the opportunities and the environment is different in different regions. You can't really compare Kenya to Malawi.
No.
Decades apart.
Yeah, because I think people, often don't realize that Kenya is almost a hub for so many things to happen. It's got a great coastline. It's got a railway line that goes from its coast to the internal places like Uganda, Tanzania. So
through a national park.
Exactly. So from an economic point of view, it's quite, it's quite a, I'd say, well-placed country in terms of growth because of all of those things it gets to benefit from. Malawi doesn't have that. Malawi's not had the level of investment into infrastructure that Kenya has. So there are also disparities within the continent itself.
Yeah, but equally, and if we were just to sort of on a localized level as well, you have students who maybe go to the Banda School or one of the Braeburn colleges or Hillcrest or something like that, or out in what's that beautiful school up north? everyone talks about?
Um,
It'll come to me, but these are top schools, Cameron. And you compare the opportunities that a young person living in a very, very different environment in Mathare or Kibera
yeah.
must experience. And, you know, those areas are a stone's throw from those types of high-end schools.
Yeah.
So for those young people, as they kind of mature into their late teens, it's difficult to see where the confluence is in terms of how the difference in their development, the rate at which those individuals will develop, and the opportunities within their networks will come. It's very,
Yeah.
very different.
Absolutely.
And that's only within Nairobi, but I will definitely come back to your earlier point that Nairobi is very much a hub for all sorts of commercial activity. And if, I guess, yeah, it's like anyone really, if you can avail yourself to certain opportunities or have the kind of educational experiences that perhaps set you apart from your peers, Nairobi would present more opportunities than Sail a Long Way.
100%. And I think, I mean, we also heard from a child rights activist from Kenya who's living in Nairobi in an informal settlement called Mukuru. And even his insights, Cameron, if you remember, were interesting. He said that, you know, a lot of NGOs operate in Kibera because it's bigger and they feel like they probably have more impact, and there's no outreach or NGO work happening in Mukuru, where, you know, at least 50% of the people who live there are under the age of 18. So, you know, like when we talk about what they want, they just want opportunity. They want vocational skill building. They don't even care at this point if they go to school. They're just like, give me something that I can do to make a living. Like that's how basic it is for them.
And the opportunities to get their hands on any sort of qualification. That's something that I've found. You know, we create our own courses, and then we will certificate individuals on different levels. So it's a constant process that we're improving, because we've had so many people that have reached our level 4 now on a particular course that we give. So we have to look at developing new course content all the time to give individuals who've come through programs like that previously, but they are just so appreciative to receive some form of recognition for the lessons or the attainment that they've achieved. It's really, really important, because they don't normally get those sorts of opportunities.
Yeah, incredible. And man, you're delivering all of this through sport, and how has your motivation changed, I would say, since the beginning? You know, from, if you can look back at yourself 10 years ago and look at who that man was and what was driving him versus what's driving you now to keep going.
Good question. I would say that as I mature in my approaches to sport for development and being open to ensuring or being open to embracing change and bringing new people in to work with me and the organization to ensure that we are being able to adapt to an ever-changing environment and make sure that, as I said earlier, we can continue to make an impact. Because, you know, as I look back kind of 2-3 years ago and before, I was always frustrated that we just weren't making enough of an impact. But now, and looking ahead, what really excites me and what motivates me is that because of the foundations that we've laid, the lessons that we've learned, the experience and the expertise that we've gained, the growing network that is very much happening now for us as an organization, the credibility that we've got to be able to say, this is what we're trying to achieve, and then we go and achieve it. That's what excites me, that prospect of being able to do more, achieve more, make a greater impact, to know that when you are engaging people in different communities in Africa, you can do so in such a way that you can relate to people and say, these are our plans, and together we will achieve those goals. It doesn't feel like it did maybe 5 years ago, more like too much of a dream.
Yeah.
Now that dream is more of a reality. It's just a case of making sure that you're putting in place the right infrastructure and resources to make it happen. So yeah, it's I guess it's maturity. It's growing with the process and making sure that as I mature, as I grow, as I learn, which I'm always, open to do, you have to be, that you then impart that element of growth and autonomy as well onto the organization, such that it can receive the relevant input from me and others, such that it can evolve in the right way. So yeah, maturity and ambition. It's a good question, Cameron. I like that.
Have you come across any kickback, basically? People like not wanting you to do your program? People saying, what are you doing here? Like,
no, not really.
that's amazing. In 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes there's maybe we've sort of touched on it already, but when there are certain situations in certain areas where communities are faced with certain social issues, like young people, it's a privilege to be able to go to school rather than maybe staying at home to work at home, because maybe they have to look after a brother or sister.
Yeah.
Because their grandparent isn't well that day and they don't have their parents, having to have that sort of responsibility. Or maybe there are teachers that have gone 3 months without receiving a paycheck. So for them, their level of motivation for being at school is limited, let alone you've got an international organization coming in saying, hey, let's play some sport. Sometimes you're faced with those sort of situations. You have to very respectfully make sure that, you're doing your best in the circumstances to engage people effectively and run a program that is impacting everyone in a positive way. But when maybe you're not faced with those sorts of really tough circumstances, which you invariably are, it's just that African people are very resilient folk. It's maybe that some communities don't quite see the value of rugby, maybe, or perhaps for whatever reason they don't understand why girls should be playing or female coaches should be playing. So you get that kind of those social issues, which mean that you can't kind of collaborate in the way that you are with other communities. So we've had, I wouldn't call it kickback, but maybe some communities falling away from our programs, just, nothing that's particularly untoward, but it just doesn't quite work, So you focus on those communities where there's greater reception, and you target a situation where they can thrive and succeed more and develop those relationships more and more. So yeah, I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what I was.
Is your fiance also one of your partners in this?
Who, sorry?
Your fiance, is she one of your partners in this?
In that she's one of my greatest supporters and very much with me on the journey in all sorts of ways. In 2019, she came out to Africa with me twice. On one occasion to drive our charity minibus about 2,500 kilometers through Malawi, Tanzania, and Kenya.
Oh man!
And then in November, pardon?
She's a good driver. Then she's a good pilot.
She's cooking at the moment. She's waiting for some praise. Yeah, no, she is a good driver. She is. I should have empowered her a little bit earlier on. I was maybe a little bit too worried, but I shouldn't have worried at all. She's an excellent driver. Yeah. And she was out with me in November with some family and friends when we did our launch event for our community center. But yeah, Tamlin and I actually met in Malawi. So I proposed in November in Zambia when we were out in Malawi and Zambia together. And so it was nice to do the whole full circle thing. But
Wow.
Tamlin is hugely passionate about Africa. And she went out in 2017 where I met her, spent some weeks there doing some volunteer work, some filmmaking, working with another NGO that we know. And she's continued to stay very practically and spiritually connected to Malawi and Africa. So yeah, we very much enjoy sharing our thoughts and views and ideas on how we approach, on how I should approach, but how the two of us should approach certain cultural or social issues, whether it's to do with Africa or anything else. And yeah, she's a huge supporter of me, someone that I can definitely bounce ideas off, and yeah, she keeps me on the straight and narrow, I think.
That's right. And other partners who you have in the in BPF, like, did you meet them along the way, or did you come at this like as a squad? How did you get?
Yeah, it's been relatively organic. So I guess considering different types of partnerships, commercial partnerships, we've got a number of commercial partners such as G4S and Zarnico, Norton Rose Fulbright, we've had DHL and Land Rover in the past. Philanthropic organizations, I mentioned the Bill McLaren Foundation, St James's Place Wealth Management, must be careful not to miss anybody out, World Rugby. So then you're thinking about sporting partners, so the likes of World Rugby, and we're soon to establish some more sporting partners to help with kind of kit provision, maybe having groups of coaches and coach educators come out to Malawi and other parts of Africa to deliver coaching workshops or educational workshops. The same can be said of schools and universities, other educational institutions we're looking to establish relationships with. On the ground, relationships and partnerships have been developed with local NGOs, government departments who support us in different ways, usually just endorsing what we're doing, but we always want to seek that sort of recognition. Obviously local schools, government schools, also international schools who look very favorable on community outreach, and sometimes we get students and staff from African international schools to engage in our work. Volunteers in terms of, I guess, a group of partnership. If you look at our volunteer model, we've had 250 volunteers. It would have been that number had all our volunteers come out this year from 35 countries around the world, aged 18 to 65, that have come out and worked with us. But some of the volunteers who were due to come out and volunteer with us this year have deferred to next year, so we look forward to welcoming them then. And then our small team, we've got myself, Rory, who was a past volunteer. He's our operations director. We've got a part-time accountant. My mother, Sally, actually looks after our volunteer program in its entirety. We've got Gareth, who's now our CEO. We've got a board of trustees in the UK. We've got our NGO in Malawi, with the board of directors there, and we've got our development officer in Malawi as well. And long term, we want to be having a development officer, education officer, and a number of coaches and support staff in each of our 8 countries that we work in. So yeah, that's very much a work in progress. But yeah, it's evolutionary. But I think the momentum is now picking up, so it's quite exciting.
It must be. I mean, does it ever blast you off your seat sometimes to say all this out loud and be like, wow, I did all of that? Like that was all, just my own sweat and like heart, that went into this. And how
honestly, to be honest, Cameron, I don't stop too often to reflect on that sort of thing. But Tamlin, my fiance, and my mother and others close to me are always encouraging me to do so. But I guess, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, this lockdown period has kind of been an enforced reflection period. And I guess for the first time in 10 years, it's been an extended period of reflection where I have been able to sort of sit back and in your words, boom, like this has been quite the journey, and it's been you know, a bit of a bumpy ride in places, but you know, things are now really, really exciting. And I think when you are in a stronger position, and I'm sure you and Amisha and others will attest to this, when you're in a stronger position, you're feeling good about life, and you're feeling good about things and the way things are going. And I think you do have to recognize those moments, because when you're on a downer, you'll forget when you're at a good point. But I think for me, and as has been the case for the last few weeks, it's been a time where I think, well, yeah, this has gone well. We're making some really good inroads. We're doing some good things in communities with thousands of children in different communities in different African countries, facilitating this crazy expedition through Africa, growing our small teams, working with local stakeholders on the ground, and moving in the right direction. I'm gonna caveat that even when you're going through some tough times, you have to appreciate the good and the bad together, because if you don't do that, you can go crazy a little bit.
So what's the challenges that you've just managed to overcome? I mean, now you've got social distancing, so obviously tag rugby is not going to be a thing for a little bit, and travel is also quite banned. So what are you doing to ensure the survival of BPF?
So when we had to cancel our expedition this year, a large operation for the charity, we had to take ourselves through that process of making sure that the programs that we were going to run this year, we've got some contingencies in place, and I'll talk you through a couple of those in a moment. That was important. We had to look after all our various partners that were involved in our projects this year, and encourage all of those that we're planning and we're strategizing and looking ahead to next year with real continued momentum, and it's all looking really positive. Obviously, look after our volunteers that were involved this year, make sure that, you know, any compensation that was due back to them, that we were able to go through that process. And some volunteers are looking forward themselves to coming out next year, and we're looking to build a team at the moment. So anyone who's interested and wants to take part in their expedition or come and volunteer with a group of people in Malawi next year, please head to bpfafrica.org. But yeah, we had to, as is the word, pivot a little bit this year. We have, as I say, in Malawi and Tanzania, we've repurposed some funding usually allocated towards sports outreach programs in those areas, and we've tasked 2 development officers in those areas, the Longway and Arusha, to connect with children and families in such a way that provides them with hand sanitizer and buckets to provide, you know, safe water to wash their hands and keep safe and clean, and provide food and refreshments, and yeah, those sorts of basic necessities to sort of keep people safe and look after their health and well-being. In Malawi, we've been able to. There was no lockdown on building activity, so whilst the schools were closed and we were able to repurpose our funding to help the community in the way that I've just described, we've been able to keep our build project going, where we've got a small team of construction workers on our site out there, which, if you think about it, there's no furlough scheme or anything like that for by the government for local workers should a contractor not be able to pay them. So it's great that we've been able to keep them on site, obviously exercising social distancing while they work. It's a large site, so they can do so effectively. They get their meals when they come to site every day, and we can keep the build project going. We're currently working on the clubhouse. Construction steelworks going up soon. We finished the accommodation block, which will be used consistently to house volunteers, which will be a revenue generator for the charity. And then here in the UK, yes, lots of work on strategy, and when we're able to start coming out from this period in a way that means that we can connect more with potential volunteers or commercial partners or sporting partners or philanthropic partners, or schools or universities that want to engage with the charity, we will do so in a very productive way. But we have been balancing the use of the furlough scheme in the UK and making the most of that, which is obviously a very, very generous scheme implemented by the UK government, and we're making the most of that as a sort of, we call it financial preservation.
Yeah, and passing that on, as you just said, to your workers in Africa, which is awesome. So much respect for that, because it seems, and you really do care. You care about the people, you care about the communities. So respect. Not just trying to keep your project alive, but you realize it's a bigger thing. One kind of like a fun question: if you could collaborate with any sportsman or sportswoman, any athlete, and basically bring them with you on one of your tours, and introduce them to your project and to these communities, who would you want to collaborate with?
Yeah, well, what I would say is that our doors are open to anybody passionate about sport, whether they are an elite athlete, former elite athlete, professional athlete from whatever sport. If they're passionate about sport, what it means for young people's social or educational development, or how sport can have an impact on a small community, and obviously for individuals who've been impacted by sport themselves, whether on an amateur or professional level, they'll know what I'm talking about. And our doors are open to anyone and everyone who wants to involve themselves in what we do. And I'm sure if they come with the right attitude, they will bring so much value to BPF and our work and the communities that we work with. But a few weeks ago during lockdown, I made some time to watch a Netflix documentary that was recommended to me, The Last Dance. I don't know if you've seen it.
Michael Jordan one?
Yeah, so when I was growing up in South Africa, even though I'd never watched any NBA or basketball, I just happened to have some American friends when I was 12, 13, and there were two brothers that got me into the NBA, and I bought a Lakers shirt. I didn't know why, but I bought one, and it was way too big for me. I don't even think I was a Lakers fan, but I had one, and I knew about all these players in the NBA at the time in the 90s that were just carving up, and yeah, I was only a young person, but I just knew about them through these American friends of mine, Kurt and Eric. And so when I watched this documentary recently, it was like a trip down memory lane, but subliminally. And I was learning all over again about the Chicago Bulls and Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan and all these guys, and this immense run that they went on. And obviously Michael Jordan's incredibly professional and never lose attitude to sport, and just had this incredible elite mindset to winning, and and how a team needs to perform at the highest level. It was quite an eye-opener, and I know that there are plenty of African guys and girls and kids that we come across who would absolutely love the chance to learn and to play basketball. We're very keen to put a basketball court on our community centre in Malawi. And so to answer your question, yeah, Scottie Pippen or Michael Jordan,
Awesome.
it would be great to have them out.
It's gone out into the universe now, so we'll see what happens. I mean, sports for me has always been such an amazing kind of manifestation of psychology. You get to see group psychology work with games like basketball or football, and then you get to see individual mentalities with boxing or tennis, you know, and you get to see how someone's head can completely separate them despite their technical skills. You know, the top 100 tennis players in the world are all more or less amazing. It's just this that makes the difference, you know? And even among the top guys and women, it's, but particularly the men, because it's three guys who've won everything the last 15 years. And their mentalities are so different. You know what I mean? And it separates them by like a
Fine, Mark.
millimeter.
Mm.
And so for me, what do you think is like the sporting mentality that you're trying to pass on? Is it about winning? Is it about optimizing? Is it about having fun? What is it for you?
So for us, it's very much an inclusive approach. We want to give young people the chance to play sport, their coaches and teachers to have the opportunity to learn how to coach sport effectively, whether that's rugby or netball, and for those skills to transfer from the pitch into the classroom, something that I learned as a teacher myself. And we have our own set of values, which I mentioned earlier, our pride values. And we as an organization, anyone who represents the organization will embody these values and promote them to the young people and community members that we engage. And they are to be professional as an individual. So these are very much, you know, skills and behaviors that we want to embody and for others to feel that they can aspire to or to demonstrate in their own lives, whether that's on the pitch or, you know, just whether it's at home or in school or wherever. But professionalism, to be respectful. So in a sporting setting, that you're respectful to others on the pitch, whether that's your teammates or your opposition or the referee or the coaches, to have integrity and honesty. And in rugby, there's nuances within the game that means that, you know, it's quite easy for people to be called out if they're not being honest. And so, you know, young kids they'll see that happening and they'll call that out of themselves and others on the pitch. And it's quite nice to see that sort of thing happening. But obviously that will extend into your life, you know, if you can be honest, you know, honorable as a person. Professional respect, integrity, discipline, to be disciplined. One of the things that we find it's quite a quirky thing, really, but things like time management is a bit of an issue for a lot of people in Africa. It's just, you know, I hate the phrase. People talk about African time, but you know, being disciplined in life and you know, in a school setting, if it's being well behaved in the classroom, or again coming back to that point of respecting elders maybe, or behaving a certain way in the classroom or on the sports field, or again, you know, in certain social settings is important. But you mentioned fun, and our last value is enjoyment. And everybody involved at Bubesi Pride Foundation, this is really important to me as the founder of the organization, for anyone who comes on board, for any children that are involved in our sporting programs, for any of the coaches. If people aren't enjoying what they do, whether it's any activities that we initiate or anything else that they do in their lives, something is amiss. And so for us, we need to get to the heart of that problem. It might not be an issue that has obviously been caused by us, but there might be something that is happening in somebody's life that means that they're not being able to enjoy something in a way that maybe they could enjoy it. Yeah. So it's important that we understand that, and obviously on a personal level, you know, if I'm working with my colleagues or whatever, we need to enjoy the work we do, and if it's not enjoyable, I need to understand why. But enjoyment is key, and I think, yeah, as we are all on this life journey independently and collaboratively, if we're not enjoying what we're doing, we need to understand why and put it right, and enjoy what we do. It's really important. We're not an organization that are looking to establish elite athletes or seek elite athletes to send them to America to play in the NBA or bring them to the UK to play Premiership rugby or anything like that. It's about inclusivity and giving young people and community members a chance to take part in activities that otherwise they just wouldn't, and giving them a chance to further themselves in different ways. Yeah.
Respect, really. It was always a dream of mine to do a community center built around games, physical games. And yeah, I think it's something sorely missing from our world at the moment and this is how we connect now. And I would love to have, just problem solving become more important for people and do it in a fun, physical way. Communication, being able to work together under stress, all these things you learn through sport, and it's beautiful. It's like poetry when it works. And yeah, I'm just happy someone's out there actually doing it in a place where it really matters too, and planting some seeds where I mean, climate change is obviously the topic of the times, and it's terrifying, and especially for developing countries, especially in areas that are already, highly damaged by over farming, or just not over farming in those areas in particular, but in general. The agriculture industry is the biggest one basically that's contributing to climate change. And that's why, sub-Saharan Africa, well, that's why the Sahara is getting bigger. So yeah, I think what you're doing and where you're doing it is like key, and your timing, I guess, couldn't be more important. How do you think, what effects have you seen from climate change in the last 10 years through your journey with BPF?
Well, yeah, I'll have to sort of precursor my response by just saying I'm not an environmental expert, but obviously do my bit on a relatively small scale. But I would say that the issue of deforestation, as I mentioned earlier in Malawi, is pretty clear to see. Our consultant site manager, the guy that manages our construction project, he's a British chap who's lived in Malawi for 25 years, and he built his own house when he established himself in Malawi about 20 years ago. And when he built his house, it was in an area it's on the road out to Zambia, about 20 kilometers out of Lilongwe. There wasn't a tree in sight. I mean, it was like barren land, because obviously it had been over farmed, or obviously communities had cut down the trees for their own uses. But when he purchased this small plot, it's about an acre, one of his own goals, he's very much someone who he's a landscape architect, so he's very keen on the environmental issues, and he just set out on his own mission to sort of regrow trees around his house, and today it's like a forest. I mean, it's just, now you can barely move for the trees that are literally now enveloping his house that he's built. And he has encouraged others, his neighbors who own plots of land, to do the same. So in a relatively short space of time, and such as the climate in Malawi, you can have some seedlings grow to full-size trees within about 5 years. And obviously the longer you leave them, the taller they'll get, as has happened for Tim. And with what he's doing in the area where he's overseeing our build project, we have plans to do the same thing, what he's done. And where we've purchased our plot of land is barren. It's been used to grow ground nuts and maize meal and that sort of thing, and tobacco, but no trees to speak of. Yeah, then they're not crops you can generate cash from, are they?
Agroforestry, but
well, not for the local communities anyway, in these areas. So we hope to be able to kind of redevelop the area in such a way that we can have some more trees locally.
Fruit and nut trees.
It's a real problem in Malawi. So
deforestation is a massive issue out there, and I know what you're saying, Rich. Sometimes the land is too arid for trees to survive, so there has to be almost like a localized restoration of like multiple trees, but there has to be enough water source for those trees, and this is something people heavily underestimate when they talk about tree planting in that part of the world.
Yeah, but I what I am saying as well is that if you are to plant trees, the climate will aid growth. I think it's just that people have had to chop down the trees for their own uses, whether it's cooking or heating or whatever, and these communities aren't helped in a way that means that they can kind of live in such a way that they can maintain themselves, but live in a way that sustains the local tree population as well. So again, that's another aspect of educating local communities, but empowering them as well. Tim, who I mentioned, has spoken about the idea of trying to educate and empower local communities such that they use their land more efficiently. So if a Malawian has a plot of land of about an acre and they use the majority of it to grow their maize meal or groundnuts or whatever it is, they apportion some of their land better than they currently are to continually regrow trees. So that's something that Tim is keen for. It's just noticed your cat.
Yeah, she's not left me alone all evening. Sorry.
Yeah, it's not a topic that I'm an expert in, but I know that it's a problem in Malawi, and yeah, we will do our bit on our plot to regenerate the tree population there. But obviously that's only going to be on very, very relatively small plot. So more needs to be done. More university throughout the country.
Yes, definitely allocating some of those billion trees for you, Rich. You're gonna help me plant them in Malawi.
What sort of trees are they?
I don't know. We'll have to figure it out.
Okay. But do you obviously plant trees that do better in certain environments, certain areas?
Native trees are best, but nowadays you can't even say because of the climate heating up. So, for example, you're taking trees that would have usually grown well in Italy and you're going to move them up to like Germany because that climate's starting to become more similar. There's a lot of tree planting going on in the Arctic Circle now. It's pretty weird. But yeah, generally, I think the best trees to plant are the ones that are going to help the people that are there and also help the soil. So trees that are going to restore the land to bring back water, and trees that are going to provide something, some incentive for people not to cut them down. People are not always, forward thinking. So if you give them fruit and give them nuts, give them a way to sustain themselves or to sustain their economy, those trees will be good.
Yeah. So it would be a lot of focus on what of those types of fruit or nut trees would do well in that region.
Yeah.
But then also it would be what natively does successfully grow, because those have the best chance of survival. So you and Tamlin are going to have to take me to Malawi so I can figure that out.
Cool.
It's a good excuse to go to Malawi.
I know, right? Any excuse to go to Africa.
Well done.
But okay, as we're kind of approaching towards the end, I have a question from the audience for you. I think it's one of our younger cohort. They say, "Thank you, Rich, for such a great session. If we wanted to do something like this ourselves, based on your 10 years of experience, would you recommend a different path to creating the impact you have?"
Wow. Would I recommend a different path? So maybe help me, Namisha. Do you think the
I
person
think
asked?
what they mean is, should we set up a charity, or potentially, are there other avenues where we can, walk down that doesn't involve setting up a charity, for example?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I think the most important thing at the outset is to participate in something, or to, I mean, if you can be the instigator, then that's great as well. But to take part in something that you're really passionate about, that's the first thing. I mean, you gotta do something that
You
really
love it.
interests you,
Yeah.
haven't you? Like that's really, really important. I must have had, before I became a teacher, I had all sorts of jobs, whether it was serving ice cream or working in supermarkets or paper rounds or working in pubs or whatever. And I enjoyed them all, but in different ways. But I wouldn't say that any of them were necessarily my calling. It was once I got into education and I realized, okay, there's certain aspects of this that really interest me. So I guess taking it back a little bit, make sure that you enrich yourself with lots of experience that means that you're able to hone in on something that you're hugely passionate about. And it might not be one thing, could be a number of things, could be a collection of things which you group together in, one particular category maybe. But there's lots of overlaps in that particular area, but you've got to be passionate about it to get behind it. And then I guess the next step would be, well, are there certain organizations or initiatives or charities? There could be commercial businesses that do certain things or have aspects of their operations, which mean that, for instance, maybe you work for a corporate organization, and maybe this part of that organization has some activities that are in line with your values or some of the interests that you have. And so throw yourself into that sort of stuff. Don't hang back. I think that is, there is this sort of, there's striking a balance. Just because you're interested in something doesn't mean you have to go and set something up. It's quite an extreme balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
But expose yourself to different experiences and activities such that you can enrich your learnings and what you take away from those experiences, so that you can get better clarity for yourself about where your interests lie, and try not to be too influenced by what others are saying to you. You've got to have that inner desire, that inner passion, that flame inside you has got to burn for what you want to do. And then if through those experiences and those activities that you throw yourself into, you feel like, and as I say, like, if maybe they can be as close to your interest as possible, maybe there is an organization out there or a charity or an initiative, something that you can do that means that it's really close to your values or your interests, then that's great. And if beyond that you want to set something up yourself, then at least you've taken yourself through that process, and you know that what you're going to do, you've had some relevant experience, but also you feel confident that you're making the right choice for you and for others, backed by your own experiences and growing expertise. But don't take yourself on too long a journey, otherwise you'll never do it.
No, and I think what I would add to that as well is, there are a lot of new structures that you can adopt to, set up something that is very impactful. If you don't want it to be a charity, then you
Yeah,
can
definitely.
do an enterprise, you can do a community interest company like what we are. But
Yeah.
I totally agree with Rich. Before you go down this road, do immerse yourself if you're still new to this whole arena, because I know, like, a lot of young people, when we create instances like this where they get to engage with so many topics, they're like fueled with inspiration. But the truth is, I think people tend to forget that it's also ugly on the other side. Like, it's great to sit and talk about this, but it's tough. And the more experience you have under your belt, the more time you've spent with other, people who've done this, or immersed yourself, like Rich said, in different programs, or ways that you can get involved with this thing that you feel so passionate about. I think that really builds your grit, your ability to tackle the problems that will come further down. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, definitely. And just also, as you said, you don't have to sort of put all your eggs into it. You can just do something on the side, which means you're kind of fueling a passion that you're able to kind of do as something on the side. That certainly if you don't intend to get paid for that, then you obviously can work in what you do already, and then do something else on the side as well that also fuels your passion.
Amazing. Thank you, Rich. Don't think we have any more questions. I think a lot of people were listening more intently to your whole story. So any final thoughts from both of you on this topic, not just one of you, both of you, on what does good quality education mean, and why does it matter for sustainability?
For me, I'll just finish by saying that as the Basic Pride Foundation looks to implement a new aspect of its operations, its strategy, looking ahead to the future, as we start to incorporate supplementary educational delivery alongside our sporting activities. Whilst we've done a little bit in the past, it's never been that good. So it's something that we're wanting to do to a much better level now. As it's education, it absolutely has to be relevant to the audience. We spoke a little bit about that earlier. To understand the needs of a community or individuals, such that there is a really relevant and holistic need that is being met by whatever the education is that's being provided.
Yeah, I would say if there's anything I took away from this, it's that traditional education implies that they have the answers, the teachers have the answers, but in reality, we don't know. And only together can we find out, through teaching, through learning, often at the same time. And what you're doing is I see that as a great exploration of knowledge, rather than trying to, be the givers of knowledge. You're just sharing your passion. And what you're doing is creating knowledge, I think, that maybe wasn't there before. So for that, I'm super grateful to know about your mission. And if I ever get out of mine, I'll happily join you.
Yeah, you're going to come to Malawi, Cameron. Definitely.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. So thank you, Rich, honestly, for sharing that with us and spending one of your evenings, your valuable time. I'm sure you've inspired so many people to, take on a passion of theirs and, in some ways use it to support kids or the purposes of education. So, when I asked you, I know you had that moment of, why is she asking me to do this? But I hope you understand now why I did, because your story is so impactful and relevant to a lot of people who are exploring this problem or this context and trying to understand what can they do to support. So, I'm really, really grateful to you for doing it. Thank you.
No worries. Yeah, no, it's I really don't do this sort of thing ordinarily, and it's nice to be asked. It's nice to join the two of you this evening, and yeah, I hope those that were listening found our conversation of value. So thank you to the two of you as well.
No problem. So in the live feed, I've already linked your website.
Cool.
But if there's any other, I know your website's got all the information anyway, but I think if people do comment saying they want to reach out to you personally, I'll kind of just send them your way through your website.
Yeah, no worries. Contact page on the website bpfafrica.org comes direct to me anyway. So
Perfect.
if anyone wants to send me an inquiry or a question or whatever, just contact me through the website.
Amazing. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Cameron. Everybody have a lovely evening and good night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yo, good luck.